Thanks to all of you.
Thank you, Senator Ernst. And I want to recognize our ranking member. Thank you for all the great work you've done on this committee and on the support you've given me and Senator Tuberville on this committee as well.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got to run, but I just want to thank you, too, for this is really what the Ag Committee is all about. And this hearing is excellent. You all have done a tremendous job. And, we hear all about the ranker up here and the this and that, but this is just everybody working together trying to figure out a solution to a really significant problem. So thank you for your testimony. It's very, very helpful, very incisive, and I'm going to get out of your way so you can actually get some good things done. But I do want to compliment you, too, in your leadership and example. I know it's hard with Senator Tuberville. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Senator. And thank you, Senator Ernst. The chair will recognize himself. Mr. Brady, what was the biggest challenge that the rural communities that you work with throughout Vermont face in identifying and applying for federal disaster assistance funds, including the funds from USDA-RD?
Thanks for asking, Mr. Chairman. Simply put, it's capacity. In Vermont, of the 247 cities and towns and another 31 or so villages, less than half, about 40% have professional career staff to help manage the town, which means the person writing the grant application is oftentimes a select board member who works in a garage, works in the farm, you name it, and they're doing it after hours. That means 60% of Vermont does not have professional capacity to deal with these things. So when the federal government stands up a grant program that needs to be applied for, and you need to follow the rules to apply, then administer, and then follow reporting requirements, 60% of the time, it doesn't work every time in Vermont. It's really overwhelming. Quick couple of stories. Marshfield, Vermont, population 1,583. Last July's flooding resulted in $4 million worth of damages. Their budget is $1 million. Their annual budget is $1 million. They do not have a career manager, which meant it was up to the elected town clerk, whose job has nothing to do with disaster management, to manage a disaster. And she called us and said, I need to write an RFP. I need an engineer. I need a consultant. I don't know how to do this. None of my select board members know how to do this. Where do I go for help? Down the road in Cabot, Vermont, the governor yesterday was at a fire station that was destroyed, red tagged by public safety, and after the July flooding. The chairman of that select board came to us and said, how do we afford to hire help? We don't have any money. Who's going to actually do all of this work for us? They have no capacity. The town of Weston, population 566, famous for the Weston Playhouse, wonderful, bucolic, incredible little town in south central Vermont. They faced the fact that the select board, Jim Linville, called us and said, we're overwhelmed, we're a tiny town, our volunteers are exhausted, we don't have any expertise, who are the consultants we can work with? Jamaica, Vermont, southern Vermont, population 1,030. 2023 floods resulted in $1.6 million in damage. That doesn't sound like a lot. You know what's a lot? That $1.6 million was in 77 different FEMA public worksheets. They have very little professional capacity in Jamaica.
Thank you. Yeah.
Who's going to do those?
Right. Thank you. I want to thank you very much. Those are very vivid and very real, and I've got to take the ranking member to some of those towns. I want to ask Ms. Moore, the last major flooding was during Hurricane Irene, preceding last year. And we did some resilience work in that. And I want you to just describe how those investments in resilience, not just building back the same, but building back better with the threat of another storm, how did those investments help the state's infrastructure withstand flooding last year?
Yeah, I think they were critical. I want to highlight two specific examples of investments Vermont made following Tropical Storm Irene. The first was more generally in enhancing what we refer to as our codes and standards, and that governs the sizing of culverts and bridges as they're replaced around the state of Vermont. We modernized our codes and standards to reflect the kinds of rainfall patterns we're seeing in the 2020s as opposed to what we were seeing in the 1960s, which had been the rainfall data driving much of our design. And as a result, structures that were replaced following Tropical Storm Irene with appropriately sized structures for our current climate, only one was lost during the 2023 floods. The overall damage to our road and bridge infrastructure was significantly lower than it was. Some of that's a reflection of the type of storm we saw last July, but I think a lot of that is a reflection of changes we've made in how we size our infrastructure. The other one I would point to is our Waterbury State Office Complex. This is a building that houses over 1,000 state employees and was closed for literally 6 years following Tropical Storm Irene, when the Winooski River flooded the complex and frankly filled the basement of that building with water. We rebuilt, filling the basement with flowable fill, elevating all of the building's utilities. The Winooski River flooded again last July, but the damage was really limited to the parking lots, and that facility was reopened within 2 weeks' time. And it's just such a night and day difference how strategic investments in hardening as well as resiliency can help us withstand a wider range of weather events.
That's very helpful. And based on your experience, do you have some suggestions on what steps Congress can take to ensure that USDA RD resources help communities rebuild in the wake of disasters?
Yeah, I think, as I alluded to in my remarks, that immediate cash flow is really important. It's very hard to go to the communities that Ted just described with his examples in the throes of a disaster and suggest what they really need to do is a planning study or an engineering assessment. RD has the capacity, the technical know-how and capacity to support communities in thinking through what the best long-term decisions are, as well as the ability to bring contracted resources to bear that oftentimes these communities don't know where to start. And so it's a partnership, but just knowing where to turn with those important questions, being able to not just react in the moment, but think for the long term. And having partners that stand ready and available to provide that kind of support in the moment is really essential.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. I recognize Senator Tuberville.